founder of Activist Skincare. The environment has been a big part of my life since I was a little girl. I went to journalism school wanting to be, a reporter and contribute to the storytelling in changing the world. And then I kind of got way off track. And now I'm getting back into my original vision for my life. So thanks for being a part of that.
Oh,
And
thank you for having me.
yeah, absolutely. So you were the girl who was born on Earth Day, which I am very jealous of. It's very cool.
Yeah, I loved being born on Earth Day. I felt so lucky. And there were always fun things going on my birthday that had to do with the environment. So that was always really nice.
That's amazing. A wonderful way to celebrate your birthday. In addition to that, you've also made a name for yourself, especially on TikTok, as the enemy of food waste. And you've said that up to 40% of the American food supply goes to waste. So that is obviously a big problem just on the surface, but could you explain for anybody who's new to this some of the reasons why that is so bad for us and for the planet?
Yeah, absolutely. So food waste reduction kind of became my main focus for a while there. I do lots of things. I make content about a lot of stuff, but when I look at food waste as an issue, I kind of see it as something that every single person can get behind. It's something that has an incredibly negative environmental impact. But then, in addition to that, if you maybe are thinking about an issue that can bring people together from both sides of the aisle, I do think that food waste reduction is exactly that, because even if you're not concerned with environmental problems, you probably don't like wasting money, or you're probably concerned about global hunger, the amount of hunger that we have here in the United States. I think not many people know about it. It's pretty staggering. And the fact that perfectly good food, 40% of it, it's estimated, is going to waste is incredibly problematic. When we think about hunger, we think about the cost of groceries right now, the cost of food. It's essentially just throwing money away. So the way I like to look at it is every single thing that you consume, whether that's food or something you buy, like a physical item, all of that has a price, like a cost, whether it's a actual numerical cost or it's a labor cost or it's an environmental cost. So when things go directly to waste, it's genuinely just throwing out people's labor, throwing out money, throwing out resources that could be used to nurture an entire community, nourish an entire community. So it's definitely an issue that I think everybody can get behind, hopefully, the reduction of food waste, if for no other reason than you want to save money or you just want to be more mindful about the resources that you have.
Right. You want to honor the labor that went into that and have gratitude for all the abundance that you have that a lot of other people, even in our developed first world nation, don't have. That's a really unfair situation.
Exactly.
So there are a lot of things that we can do as individuals to combat this. Could you go into a few of your best beginner tricks to reduce food waste?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a couple really common ones that most people know about, like storing your produce appropriately so that it lasts as long as possible. Things like meal planning, actually coming up with the recipes that you want to make and buying only the ingredients necessary for that. I know a lot of people do something called wish shopping or wishful shopping, where they'll buy a giant container of greens thinking, oh yeah, I'll eat these if they're in the fridge. But if you don't have a plan in place, like things to go alongside them or things to fill in the gaps, so you're not just eating a big bowl of greens, something that will make you actually want to eat that food, that keeps it out of landfill a lot more appropriately. So things like that. And then I'm a huge proponent of the freezer. I think not a lot of people utilize their freezer enough, and they want like a really fun, sexy food waste tip where it's like a fermentation project. Or I think the easiest way to reduce food waste is to preserve the food that you've made so that it can be eaten at a later date. So for example, if I'm making like a big soup or a big pot of something, I generally freeze half so that I have it on hand for a later date, and that extends its life by like months. So that's really helpful. That's a good example. I honestly could go on and on, but lately, and this is like an interesting concept, lately I've been fascinated by how we can use AI to help in food waste reduction. And I'm not an expert on this subject by any means, but I've been kind of experimenting a little bit with Chat GPT. So a grocery list that's itemized for exactly all the meals that I'm going to use. So exactly, one onion that can be cut in half, and we use half an onion for one recipe, half an onion for the other. So there's absolutely no waste, that sort of thing. So that's something I'm kind of workshopping right now. But honestly, in this day and age, like there's so many tools that are available to us that we can really utilize in a positive way to have an awesome environmental impact. And I think that's really cool. So that's something to think about.
Definitely. I had not even considered AI as a way to reduce food waste, but I do know that people use it to come up with recipes for them and create a shopping list and everything.
You can also go in to your fridge, take a look at what you have. My podcast co-host, Maria, and I did a challenge at the beginning of the year all about an eco reset. One of the things that was on there was doing a pantry audit. So quite literally taking every single thing out of your pantry. You could do that for your fridge and your freezer as well, because I know things tend to get just kind of like lost in the back of the freezer. But you can take every single thing out and make note of exactly what you have. It doesn't take that long, and I swear it will save you so much money. And then if you want, you can just write it down on a piece of paper and kind of come up with some recipes around those ingredients, or you can plug them into ChatGPT and say, hey, I'm going to go to the grocery store. I want to fill in the gaps here with these dry staples that I have or these frozen things that I have. And ChatGPT can kind of come up with a meal plan or recipe plan to fill in those gaps, to use up what you already have before you go to the store. So you can kind of plug in like, okay, I have this sauce and I have a bunch of jasmine rice. What could I add to kind of make that a full meal? The prompt comes back and it says, okay, could you go get some frozen broccoli or something to kind of make a little stir fry, get some tofu, and then you're filling in those gaps rather than getting all new ingredients, which is obviously going to make your grocery bill so much higher. I think it's really important to focus on what we actually have in our households right now. I hear a lot of people, I'm guilty of this too, but a lot of people will say, I have nothing to eat. And for a lot of us in a developed country, who are living above the poverty line, like that is generally not the case. You probably have some things to eat. It might not be exactly what you want to eat right now, but you probably have something, and with just a little bit of creativity, it could come to life and be a really delicious, nutritionally complete meal. So I think focusing on the resources that already are available to us. So like we talked about earlier on, everything has a cost, whether it's a labor cost, environmental cost, or just a physical actual number cost in US dollars. That cost should not be going to waste, in my opinion. So that's something that I think I don't hear people talk about enough within food waste reduction. And I'd like to see more people focus on that, doing an audit of the things that you already have. And that goes beyond just food waste. We can think about that next time we want a new product, like an actual item that we want to go out and buy. Let's say something that's trending, like those Stanley cups right now somewhere, and you can kind of put something together. You might have forgotten about it, or maybe not thought to use it that way. And there's just a lot of like resourcefulness that can come in handy. And once we start thinking in a more resourceful way, you're kind of forced to be more sustainable, I think.
Yeah. I think that for a lot of people, it's that mental load of planning things. And, our lives are also very packed with our work obligations, our family obligations, trying to take care of our own selves. And meal planning for a lot of people can feel like just another piece of the mental load and not something that inspires us. But I think reframing it as this is like a puzzle to solve. How can I be creative and resourceful around this and express myself through this? How can I enjoy this instead of just feeling like it's a chore or an obligation that just needs to get done? That's been more helpful for me as a busy working mom to think like this is an opportunity to express my creativity. It's not just like part of my mom job.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a way to use the energy and resources that you have to feed your family. That could be a really gratifying feeling. I mean, I don't have children, but I can imagine that the mental load is incredibly heavy on working moms, especially when we're already trying to be let's say, sustainable or ethical in the way that we live our life, it is an added layer. This is why I've released a couple of budget meal plans myself that are available on my site that are based around that, because I think it just requires a little bit of creativity that not everybody's interested in doing. But I love it, so it's fun for me. And I would say if you hate grocery shopping and you hate cooking, meal planning ahead of time to make it as seamless and almost like thoughtless as possible is amazing. Ordering groceries for pickup or for delivery can be really helpful because it completely takes away that like impulse buying, you know?
Mhm.
Like you walk into the grocery store and you see a product that you really want, and all of a sudden it's in your cart.
And be related to anything else either. It doesn't really fit in with your meal.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't fit in, and then it costs a bunch of money, and then it just takes up space in the fridge and it doesn't work. But if you order online, whether it's for pickup or delivery, I know a lot of grocery stores you can pick up and it's free. It's no extra charge. That is really helpful for people who absolutely hate stuff like this. So that's just one way you can reduce food waste, you know? But there's so
And
much
that's
to discuss on this topic. You could go on forever. I love talking
totally.
about this. So.
I just want to give people one tip that I recently discovered a couple months ago, and I really like systems. So I had done all this research into all these different meal planning and grocery list apps. And the one that I found that really worked for me to reduce that mental load of even thinking of what to cook. That was kind of like my sticking point, is like, what am I going to cook that everyone's going to like? And so I found this app called Plan to Eat, and you can create like up to a month, I believe, or maybe it's 4 weeks at a time of kind of like recurring recipes. So you can decide, not only is every Tuesday going to be Taco Tuesday, that recipe is just going to keep appearing in your schedule over and over again, so that you don't have to keep thinking about, okay, where's that taco recipe? And then it does connect to a grocery list in the app, and you can also send that grocery list out straight from the app to whatever grocery delivery or pickup service that you have. So I think that's a great one for moms who are, or anybody busy who's just not interested in the creative aspect right now and just needs to get it done.
I just downloaded it while you were saying that. I was like, that's so cool. So I'm definitely going to take a look at that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
cool.
In this day and age, there really are so many tools that are available to us. A lot of them are free. You know, like what I was saying with the Chat GPT, that's a free service. You can literally tell it exactly what to do. I know people are really hesitant when it comes to AI. Like my parents are hesitant. You know, it's a new thing, and I understand people's hesitation, but I do think if the tools exist, let's use them to our benefit, right?
So another aspect of food waste that you briefly mentioned is the environmental impact. And it's not just like all those resources going into farming and producing the food, it's also the what happens to the food if it becomes trash. If it's going into a landfill, what happens to it?
Right. Well, that's a great question, because there's a lot of misinformation on this topic and there's a lot of confusion on this topic. I hear people push back a little bit when I express that it's very unlikely certain foods will actually biodegrade in landfill. Because I think, obviously, if you throw an apple core into your bushes, you just naturally assume it's just going to break down. And that is true to an extent. The issue comes in with trash bags, kind of a bag filled with biodegradable material, a plastic bag sealed, and then going straight into a landfill. The odds of that food breaking down appropriately in a way that's actually environmentally friendly they're very low. I don't want to misquote this study, but basically there's been studies and there's been findings that show that there are apples and random produce that's been sitting in landfill for years and years and years, and it has not broken down. So that's another thing within food waste reduction. Obviously, our first line of defense is just using the food, just consuming it, eating it, preserving it, whatever, keeping it from going to waste at all costs. But once there is actual waste, which, it's inevitable, there will be food waste, whether it's like the ends of carrots or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The best option is, I'm sure you're going to guess, composting. And we can compost things in a lot of different ways. Not only is it environmentally beneficial, but it's gross to have food rotting in your trash can.
Yeah.
And it significantly reduces the amount of gross trash in your house, to put it quite simply.
Exactly. And I'm lucky enough to live in California, where it became a law, I believe, at the beginning of 2023. So just over a year, it became a law that homes and businesses are required to compost food waste, that it can't go into the trash, into the landfill.
Yeah.
But, I've noticed, back to that, no community is close to 100% adoption. And a lot of it is, I think, lack of awareness.
I
And so
agree.
I'm curious to ask you, as an activist in this particular space, what do you think the best ways to encourage others and to gently nudge them and make them aware of something that they may just have like a peripheral awareness of, but they're not focused on it like I am on a daily
Yeah.
basis, you are on a daily basis? How do you do it in a nice way?
Over the past couple of years, I've sort of learned to take a different approach with that sort of thing. So, and will be controversial. I'm sure there are people who disagree very much with this approach, but my belief is that there are people who will never get on board with this sort of thing for the same reasons that we will.
Mm-hmm.
So there are people who think very differently than we do, who are not interested in changing those beliefs. I have some family members who are very, very conservative and don't believe in climate change, like, for example, and I don't see that changing anytime in their life. Hopefully that, maybe I'm wrong, but personally not holding my breath. And I think when it comes to environmental issues, generally speaking, there are other angles that we can take. So like I was discussing with food waste reduction, I'm able to talk to those family members about food waste reduction, and the angle that I take is money. So if you are not interested in the greenhouse gases that are emitted when food goes to landfill, if that's not something that is going to, set off any alarms for you or be of concern for you, let's talk about how much money you're throwing in the trash in terms of groceries. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about how many people, maybe you're part of a church and you're very concerned with hunger and helping those in a lower income bracket than yourself. How much food is going to waste that could otherwise be going towards people in need? So taking different angles, I think with most environmental concerns, most hot topics within environmental spaces, they do also have a monetary angle, and they also have like a human rights angle. Like, I'm very grateful that I was born into this, and this has always been the norm for me. I grew up pescatarian in the South in the 90s, which was very abnormal. Like, I'm very blessed in that way that this was something that I was just brought up in. There's a lot of people that have never even heard of this. They've never even been introduced to sustainability. And that's purely circumstantial. It's outside of their control. So I think meeting people where they're at, that's kind of the best defense that we have, and encouraging people to look at things from a different perspective. But in the meantime, we really don't have the time to be changing everybody's minds and waiting for everybody to get on the same page. We need to be making changes now. So however we can get there, I think it's a win. So with food waste, if people are concerned about the cost of groceries right now, which we all are, cost of groceries is really high right now, and everybody's talking about it from every different background. So let's change the way we look at our food. Let's be more mindful of the food that's going to waste. Let's plan our meals. Let's, act accordingly.
I think another thing that a lot of people who they're willing to acknowledge that climate change is an issue. They don't necessarily want to accept that it's human caused or that our
Right.
whole world completely needs to change in order to fight it. And I actually think that the fact that methane is, I believe it's 28 times more potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. And that is what's released when food rots in, I believe it's anaerobic decomposition, which means it's rotting in a whole different chemical way than it would if it were out in the open with airflow. So when you mentioned those
Exactly.
plastic bags, they're preventing the airflow and oxygen from getting to that chemical decomposition that should be happening if this food was, just laying on the ground like in nature, like a piece of fruit falls off of a tree and it rots and the bugs eat it and stuff. That's very natural and it doesn't contribute to climate change. But that same piece of fruit in a plastic bag or buried under the soil or buried under trash in a landfill is releasing methane, which is 28 times more potent than CO2, and that is a big driver of climate change. So that's a way to reduce your climate change footprint without changing your car or having to walk or bike more or really changing much about your lifestyle at all. So I like to let people know that that is something that they hadn't thought of. In my family, we actually thought, oh, like years ago, we thought it's actually a good thing if there's organic material in the landfill. It's making that soil that, sometime in the far future, when all this stuff is broken down, at least there will be some like nutrients in that soil. But it's actually definitely bad to put organic stuff into the landfill.
Yeah, I hear that misconception a lot. I definitely think I used to hold that too. Like I grew up composting, but when I became an adult and moved off on my own and had roommates, it just like wasn't feasible for me. Again, because the city, I lived in Miami at the time, it was just like there was no infrastructure, there was no education on that topic at all. So I think it's really important that education is more mainstream. I'm super lucky now that the city that I'm in has a sustainability office and they're doing some good work. They're pushing against a lot of these stereotypes about Florida, and they're doing what they can. But when it comes to education, there's a ton of misconceptions about food waste, and the idea that it just goes back to the earth. Like, I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of years of trash piled up, non-biodegradable materials in a landfill.
So, what are your thoughts on commercial food waste? Like most food waste is not probably coming from our houses and from our own kitchens. It's like grocery stores, restaurants, schools. As a mom, the school food waste situation just triggers my eco anxiety hardcore.
Yeah. So for the record, I think that the percentage of food that's actually wasted at the household level is a lot higher than people think.
Hmm.
I used to think that it was almost all commercial food waste that was causing the problem, and it is a huge problem. But I need to look up the exact statistic, but I do believe out of that 40%, it's significant. It's something like 15 to 20. So it is significant enough that we do need to tackle it at the household level, but we also need to actually have commercial composting facilities in place for commercial food waste. There is no commercial composting facility, to my knowledge, the last time I checked, there is none in my area that would allow for food wasted, like you're discussing, like schools, hospitals, that sort of thing. That food is not going to a commercial composting facility. And it's my belief that it should be. So
Right.
that's something, that's infrastructure that we absolutely need. And if we want to get with the times, if we want to move forward into that, I know I used to live in Germany and the trash was separated so many different ways, and it was just culturally the norm. It was very, very normalized, and it was very much something that German citizens, in my experience, were very happy to do. Germans naturally like to follow rules, I think. But it is definitely something that culturally we need to shift towards. I also think that commercial food waste reduction can be combated with the rise of more companies who are focused on food waste reduction. So your Misfits Market, your Imperfect Foods, there's tons of companies that are built specifically around a commonly wasted food product, and they've turned that into an opportunity to build a business. And I have so much respect for that. Like, I get sent a lot, just the nature of what I do, I get sent a lot of food products that are made by brands who are targeting food waste. So I just got sent some tomato sauce from a tomato sauce company that exclusively works with otherwise wasted tomatoes. And that's great. We also need to understand, I think that there's a disconnect specifically within the US between our food and its origin. It's been making me happy to see, within our capitalist framework, our consumerist framework in the United States, it is kind of this whole don't beat them. If you can't beat them, join them thing, where if you can build a business that fits within the American framework, that is actively reducing food waste, I love that. It makes me so happy. It makes me want to support you as a company. And it's been great over the past like 5 to 10 years to see the rise in that.
And with a new business comes marketing, which is education. So
yes,
as a business owner in the sustainability space, I do have to focus on educating people on why my model is different, and that helps change the culture eventually. And I've seen it impact larger brands. I own a skincare brand, and I have seen the rise of indie skincare brands that are taking sustainable approaches that are revolutionary in terms of the CPG industry. I've seen it trickle up and impact the larger corporate owned, like, Unilever owned brands who are now offering refills. So it can influence the culture in both directions.
100%. I think that mindful consumerism at this point in time, it is the way forward. It is. And I'm sure as a sustainable brand owner, you're very familiar with Paul Hawken. Paul Hawken is really just a trailblazer in this space of let's create green businesses. Let's use the system that is already in place. You're not going to dismantle capitalism within our lifetime. You're not going to dismantle the American consumerist mentality overnight. Let's use these systems to actually benefit our message. Let's use these systems to create sustainable, eco-minded, people-first businesses. And we know that it's possible. Like, the example that I use all of the time is when I was a kid, there was no dairy-free milk. That just wasn't a thing. Like, it just wasn't a thing. And it's so crazy that just in the past few years, it's almost like default. When you go to a coffee shop, they ask you, you want oat milk?
Yeah.
They all have it now. And you go to the dairy-free milk section of the grocery store and there's 50 options versus when I was a kid, I remember my dad getting rice milk from like the health food store, and it was like a really big deal. It was like some real hippie stuff, and now it's everywhere. And I think that that's just one example of how we can shift culture in a positive way. We do need to do it faster, right, but we can do it. So it's something to consider. And it really inspires me to see eco-minded business owners. So major props to you and to your company and to everything that you're doing, because I know it's not easy to work within this framework and not cut corners.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I definitely, when I thought about starting a business, I was like, it was a reaction to having to work for other businesses that were completely opposite of my values in a lot of ways, especially in sustainable ways and labor ways as well, human rights and labor ways. But yeah, it's like, we don't need another skincare brand or another tomato sauce brand or anything unless you're going to really do something different and be the change. There is just too much consumption across the board, and we need to focus on what is the next iteration of consumerism that is a lot more in balance with the planet if you're going to get into business. That
Absolutely.
should be step one.
Yeah. How can we benefit? This is specific to clothing, but I read a statistic that just blew my mind, but it also doesn't surprise me at all that we have enough clothes on this planet right now to clothe the next 6 generations. And so the idea that we need another clothing brand that just makes t-shirts and jeans with unsustainable practices, it's insane. We need less. But if you're going to come on the scene now and create a business, which is, it's a very American ideal in the Western world, we do value entrepreneurship. I very much do as well. Let's make it as sustainable and ethical as we can. Let's actually shift things. Let's be a force for good within the system that's honestly not often a force for good. So it's something to keep in mind. And I think it just makes me respect a business even more.
Yeah,
It's worth
letting
it
some
though.
opportunities pass you by, and making decisions based on your values it can be hard. You have to be a boundaried person, have healthy boundaries, and but that's what it's all about. That's doing something new and changing the status quo. It's going to be hard. Swimming upstream.
Yeah, I
So,
agree.
so I would love to also ask you about growing food at home. That's another opportunity to be more in touch with where our food comes from, and even get a front row seat to seeing, like, okay, this got nibbled by some mystery bug or bird or something when I wasn't looking. Am I still gonna, eat this? And seeing all the labor and all the resources, the water and the soil, and any fertilizers or things that you add to the soil. It's awesome to, like, really see how, especially for kids, to see how food comes from practically nothing, out of thin air.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's something I'm really, really passionate about. And as you just said, with people finding a connection to their food, I personally think that a lot of the issues with our food system come from the fact that people are completely disconnected from their food. People are really, really unable to grasp how they grab something at the grocery store and it's on their plate. There's not that connection between where did this come from? Whose hands helped make this? How many resources went into growing this piece of lettuce or whatever it is? And I think that one of the easiest ways to combat that is to try and grow your own food. And once you see the value, I mean, I'm looking at my lettuce tower right now. You enjoy a salad so much more when you know how many weeks went into growing it, and energy and water and sunlight and nutrients that went into that lettuce. It makes you appreciate your food more. So I highly recommend anyone to try and grow a little bit of their own food. I know that that's not accessible for most people, but if you can just have a pot with some herbs, honestly, even that, it makes a difference. It really does. And what you said about kids, I mean, being a mom, I bet it's so exciting to see their little brains try to wrap around the fact that they grew something that they can eat, and it makes them maybe want to eat their vegetables more. Who knows? But I
It
think it's,
does. I
yeah,
can
because they
say
grew
that for
it.
sure. He's experimenting with flavors, and he's seeing that, like, sometimes there is a little grasshopper looking thing on the leaves, and this is part of an ecosystem, and the amount of water and the amount of sunshine and everything really impact the result that you get. So it's really awesome to be living in an organic world. Like, we are organisms, and so are these plants, and so are these bugs who are flying in to lay their eggs on this or to get food or something. We are very removed from the fact that Earth is a big ecosystem and we are all organisms. That's kind of like
Yeah.
a realization I had one day, is like, I'm not a human that is some completely separate species from the rest of the animal kingdom and this planet that we all came out of and evolved from.
You're a
We
part of
are
something bigger.
right, and we have so much in common, and we rely so much on every other part of the ecosystem as well.
I love that. And your kids are having a great, great mom. Like, what a
Oh,
cool
thanks.
upbringing. No, seriously though, because that's really important. And I think that's an awesome foundation to have in life. It's one of the things I'm most grateful for. I also had that foundation, especially with growing your own food, being outside. I think all of us can agree that's a pretty awesome way to raise your kids. So you're doing amazing. So
Thank you.
that's really exciting. I mean, and the fact that they're starting to understand what the connection is between them and their food. I think a lot of people, I mean, there's people in this country, more than we care to admit, that live in food deserts where they don't have access to
Absolutely.
fresh food. And it's just really important to introduce everybody, not just kids, but it's good to start young, to the idea that you can grow your own food. You can, there's so much abundant, there's so many abundant resources that are available for us to take within reason. Obviously, we don't want to be greedy, but it's something that I think is very much missing from most kids' lives, from most people's lives. So if you can have the ability to grow your own food, whatever it is, in whatever capacity, I think it's one of the best things you can do to connect yourself to what you're eating and to connect yourself to your environment, the seasons, the elements, all of the above. And also, it's just so fun and so satisfying. But to answer your initial question, I grow lettuce and greens and herbs on a hydroponics tower. I've had that thing for 2.5 years. Mine is called Lettuce Grow. The brand is called Lettuce Grow. It's actually Zoe Deschanel's brand, and it's awesome. It's amazing. Like, it's all self-contained. It's incredibly compact. It's like a tower, so you can put it inside if you live in an apartment where you don't have like a balcony or green space. And they're not cheap, but in the long run, I mean, I've moved with the thing several times and it's not been difficult to just pick it up and take it. It has a tank for water, and then the water circulates through. It just needs to be plugged in. So it's amazing. During the times when I can grow in the summer, I'm not able to because it's just so hot here, but I don't buy greens at all. I don't buy any lettuce at all. It just comes from my tower. So that's one option. There's so many options. You can grow in bags, you can grow in pots. There are tiny hydroponics or little countertop gardens that you can have. Mm-hmm. There's really so many ways to do it. And I highly recommend, doing it if you can. One of the things I talk about a lot within sustainability is just doing the best that you can within your own unique set of circumstances. So yeah, that's big. I mean, not everyone has the resources that others do. And whether they're monetary or they're limited to the place that you live, your actual location, you should never feel guilty about your ability to do more or less for the environment. Everybody's within their own unique set of circumstances, and everyone just needs to make the most of that. So that's kind of the way I look at it, or try.
You're absolutely right. We all have to work with the circumstances we've got. I do think that gardening, just like in World War II, we had victory gardens in this country as a way to shore up our food scarcity issue during that war. I think there's now a kind of like a revolution about having control and rebelling against this broken food system, bringing it under your own roof or your own plot of land or whatever you've got. You can even grow potatoes in a 5-gallon bucket. So it does not need to be Pinteresty or Instagrammable. It can be, just as practical and utilitarian as possible. And I think it's a fun way to rebel against this system that we're living in.
Yeah, it's also fun. I think, I've been thinking a lot lately about overconsumption and consumerism in this country, and just the rise of like micro trends and everybody needing to buy things all the time. And I think I saw somebody else's video on this that really inspired my perspective, but basically just the idea that if people had more hobbies that were fulfilling to them creatively or otherwise, they would be less likely to consume on the level that we see now. The normalization of overconsumption is incredibly problematic. That's why I just really recommend that people get into turning your environmental activism into a hobby for yourself. So like I was saying, the meal prepping, the kitchen restocks, the homemade kitchen restocks where you're creating all this food from scratch, or gardening, growing your own food. All of these things are, environmentally positive, but they also can be a hobby that is fulfilling to you, to get away from screens, to actually go outside, put your hands in dirt, roll up some sourdough. There's just so many different ways that we can kind of just in small everyday ways push against the systems that we don't agree with.
I totally agree with you about hobbies. I think that this like capitalist system that we live in has created a consumer culture and consuming is, I think, the opposite of creating.
I
So
agree.
creativity is not about how artistic are you and how talented are you in the visual arts or music or whatever. It's about how resourceful are you, how much of a problem solver are you, and actually just creating something new, taking what exists and imagining a whole new thing. And it's very, very fulfilling. And I think we are becoming less fulfilled as a society because we're spending less time with creativity, because we do have this scenario where all this cheap all these cheap goods are constantly pushed on us through advertising and influencing, and we feel an anxiety about keeping up with everybody else and the things that they have. And I wish people would start thinking, well, what have I done to be creative today? Like, how can I keep up my creativity levels with the Joneses? That's one thing that I am a mother of just one kid. And so he gets a lot of attention and focus on, I'm like always optimizing things. I'm an optimizer. And so I think a lot about like what kind of cultural environment do I want him to grow up in? And one of those things that I really value is creativity and problem solving. I just think that that's lost these days. In childhood, really early, we have too much structure and too much externally planned things with all these children's time. Their days are just so planned and they're so busy and they don't have this openness and just like the freedom of like several hours a day that kids used to have to be creative and inventive. And instead we're teaching them to be consumers from a really young age instead of creators. So that's
a
just my
really
little
interesting.
soapbox as a mom.
No, that's a really interesting input as someone who's actively raising another person. That's very interesting. I think so. Lately, I've been calling it relentlessly resourceful. Trademark. I'm going to do something with it. I'm just kidding. It's not trademarked, but I hope to do something with it. I think it's kind of the approach that I try to take to everything. Relentlessly resourceful, kind of. I think it covers the environmental topic. It covers the creativity topic. It covers the, all of it. It's an incredible use of your time just to learn to be more resourceful with the resources that we have, especially, in times when things are uncertain. We just all experienced a global pandemic and, realized that it might be a good thing to be a little bit more resourceful. And I know that's kind of become a talking point on both sides of the aisle. And I don't necessarily think we need to lean away from it. I know there's differing opinion, but growing your own food, learning how to make your own food, learning skills to maintain a household, whether it's to save money or to be more environmentally friendly, all of the above, or just for fun. It's all good and it's valuable, and it's something that we should put at the forefront of what we're teaching the next generation, in my opinion, as someone with no kids.
Our society has progressed because we're so specialized that we divide up all the parts of survival as a species into all these little jobs. And so everyone is generally focused on just one tiny piece of the survival as a species for us. But yeah, like I think that puts us in a precarious situation when you have something like a pandemic come along where you're so reliant on this whole system working perfectly that when something in the supply chain breaks down, or you can't go out in public or something like that, then you really realize how we're not necessarily stronger for all of that specialization.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's exactly what I think. So I agree completely. I love the products that you sent over. I've been using them and I love them. The oil is the one that I used.
Nice. Precious oils. That's the leave-on one.
You can never go wrong, just slathering on tons of moisture and oil. It's always better. At night, it's like perfect to lock everything in.
That's awesome. I use precious oils both morning and night. And my tip is I use sunscreen as well. It's a zinc-based sunscreen stick that I usually apply on
Nice.
especially the tops of my cheeks. That's where the sun's rays hit you, and that's where you're going to
Mhm.
have more aging problems.
That's
That's
so
pretty
awesome.
cool.
It's actually really hard to find a good sunscreen, and I wear SPF every day, but as someone with like a darker skin tone and I want to use the reef safe stuff, it's really hard
Uh,
to find one that doesn't make me look like a ghost, you know? So I'll need to check out the one that you have.
well, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation and so nice to chat with someone who thinks on a daily basis about these same things that I do. And great to help spread the word and build awareness for some of these daily habits that could be tweaked and improved for the sake of people and our planet.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was such a nice conversation. I agree. It's always nice to talk to somebody that kind of thinks the way you do with some, you know, outside perspectives. And
Yeah.
running a sustainable business is a really unique challenge, and it's really fascinating to talk to somebody who's done it pretty successfully. So, I'm so happy to use your products and to try and see what comes next for you.